Hey guys, welcome back. I'm Emily.
I'm Greg.
And we are going to be discussing the short story, My Friend the Murderer, by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. This is not a Sherlock Holmes story.
No.
And while he wrote a lot of things other than Sherlock Holmes, Sherlock Holmes is what he's best known for.
Oh yeah. But
sure.
he wrote science fiction. He wrote The Lost World. He wrote about he was involved in the photographing fairies scandal and wrote a book about that, which Emily's currently
Yes.
reading. And,
Yes.
and he wrote just a huge body of work, way beyond just Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, including some things he believed were nonfiction about the metaphysical world, because he was a big part of the spiritualist movement, big into the occult, did a lot of seances, he and his wife did. And they were friends with a multitude of very interesting people, including Harry Houdini. Really good friends, mutually skeptical of each other. So very interesting history. Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had a lot of very interesting beliefs, and I think it shows a lot in the creativity of his work.
Yeah.
But just a really creative person, large body of work. So yeah, this is definitely not a Sherlock Holmes story,
No.
but definitely along those lines where it's kind of a crime fiction.
Yeah, but it's not a mystery. When you told me what you wanted to read and you told me the title,
Yeah.
what went through my mind, a title like My Friend the Murderer, is like if a guy has this friend who seems like a normal person,
Yeah.
but turns out to be a killer,
Yeah.
but the main character didn't know about it and discovers it, and
Yeah.
it's a whole. But no, that's what I was kind of expecting, but that's not what we got.
No, actually, what's interesting about the story, to go into the premise a little bit, is it's about a doctor who works at a prison. And there is a gentleman there at one point while he works there who the guards just kind of say, "Hey, doc, he's got a cold. Go check on him. But ask him his story. Like, real interesting story." So the doctor does. He goes and sees this guy, checks in on him, makes sure he doesn't have a cold, makes sure he's doing okay, and then just kind of, the guy just knows. He's like, "You're here because one of the guards told you you should hear my story."
Keep talking.
And this guy's story is predominantly just a series of unfortunate events. What had happened was he was part of a gang who was pretty well known for thieving and doing a lot of criminal activity. Kind of a, it's not even mob, because it's not as organized as a mob. They're just a gang who just committed a lot of violence. So they all get captured, and he gets amnesty by ratting out the rest of the team that they couldn't capture. So he has legal right to leave the prison, but the prison at first can't let him leave because there's so many people lined up at the gate who are ready for this guy to just walk out so they could kill him.
Yep.
Because not only did he, rat out all his buds, but all his buds' family and friends are now after him.
Yep.
So they have to go through this series of, trying to get him out, and then him coming back because somebody figures it out, and they just ship him back. And so it's this process of him kind of, coming and going from the prison system and finally trying to get away, but still being followed a lot by every, basically, police officer who knows who he is. So he kind of gets trailed all through everywhere. Everywhere he tries to go, officers there know who he is and try to ship him back. And essentially, he does go back. And, it kind of concludes with him dealing with kind of a loose end, so to speak, but ending up dying in the process. Spoiler alert.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that this guy's... The whole point of this story, I think, or, what I gleaned from this story is... I shouldn't even say gleaned. I assumed he would die at the end, because this was such a miserable life for this character to continue to live. They had to die in the end. Because their life was so miserable, there was no redemption story. The moral of the story is when you do a crime, you're pinned for life. And so, but the guy kind of befriended this doctor in a moment. Not that they had a continued relationship, but in a moment, this guy befriended this doctor, considered him a friend enough to tell him his whole story and all the crap that was going on. And then later the doctor re-encounters him, but it's because he's dying.
Right.
Outside of a pub that the
Right.
doctor is just trying to get directions from And a lot of this, most of this predominantly takes place in Australia, which was a prison colony at the time.
Yes.
So it was not unusual for gangsters to have allies and family members kind of living where they were incarcerated. That was a pretty common thing, especially if you were a family that was into crime in general. Like, if all your brothers and stuff were always in trouble, you probably were too, and at some point you'd all end up in Australia because it was a prison colony.
Yep.
It's just the way it worked.
Yep.
So, it's an interesting story because it speaks a lot to how society treats criminals, how the police treat criminals,
Mm-hmm.
and how criminals treat other criminals.
Yeah.
Like, there's just a really interesting hierarchical dynamic going on. And I had a lot of perspective about this because my family has experience when my father was self-employed with employing ex-convicts.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of this does speak to the reality you deal with when you are an ex-convict. Some people are out to get you. And, like, one of the things that we figured out early on, and in fact even a parole officer told us, was our job is to get them back in jail. It's literally their job, is to get them back into incarceration, because prisons are not always state-funded. A lot of them are privately owned.
Yeah.
So the whole point is to keep business going.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the way it is.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, several parole officers we had known throughout that time either treated us like criminals or told us, yeah, honestly, this is a really thankless job, because it's literally our job not to rehabilitate these people. It's to assume they're always going to be criminal and send them back.
Right.
Which was really heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really frustrating, too, for our family, because we were also getting pegged by the cops a lot, because they were assuming that because we wanted to help people get a second chance, at least give them a chance at it, that we were also involved in criminal activity. So they would follow people. You know, my dad would get followed a lot by the police.
Mm-hmm.
And they always were asking, like, if a parole officer had to come talk to you as an employer, they were always asking, like, why are you doing this? And he's like, 'cause they deserve to try and, like, make a life after this. Like, they deserve to at least have a second chance.
Mm-hmm.
So I gleaned a lot of this, a lot of things from this, because this really speaks a lot to the experience we had as kids, knowing these guys and going onto job sites and, like, hanging out with our dad and dropping things off and whatever, and meeting these people and having them over for dinner and having, you know, hearing their stories about, like, a lot of them were vegetarians because they were afraid to eat the meat in prison, because people do stuff to the meat in prison.
Oh, no.
They'd spit in it and do all kinds of crazy things. And so, like, a lot of them were vegetarians, so that was really interesting for our family when we'd invite them over, make sure we had enough veggies and stuff for them to eat, because they wouldn't eat the meat because they were just so turned off by it in prison. So, I mean, there's a lot of really unfortunate stories when it comes to the way that people are treated when they've been in the system.
Yeah.
And I felt like this really reflected that really well, especially in terms of gang violence. Mm-hmm. Like, gang members do come after people.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That's been a situation that has been dealt with before from, not my family, but families who also were trying to do similar things to help people out.
Yeah.
And you just get pegged for life as a convict. And as anybody associated with them, this whole, like, innocent until proven guilty,
Well, not
then
from
you're
the
guilty
average
forever.
people, right.
Yeah, then you're guilty forever, and then anybody you associate with is too.
Mm-hmm.
Like, society just really burn notices people like this.
Yeah.
Just blacklists them, and there's nothing they can do about it. They can't dig their way out of the debt that they earned in prison, because prison makes you pay for everything.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, you don't get a free ride.
No.
You pay for it all. They also have to buy a lot of their own groceries and hygiene products and everything. Yeah.
Wow.
Like, people don't know that.
No.
But yeah, so they're already in debt usually when they get out of prison, so they need a job right away, and the parole officers make them get a job, and then you just get trashed and shit on the rest of your life. And I felt like this story really portrayed my family and my experience with some of these people that we had seen.
Okay.
And I felt like I gleaned a lot from that, like, just saying, like, in the 1920s it was no different. Like, humans just don't change, which is kind of depressing, but it also makes me really feel like the call for change is starting to happen now in light of a lot of stuff that's been going on in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a lot more hope. But at the same time, there is that aspect of, it's been like this for 100 years now.
Yeah.
When does it change?
Well,
or will it
probably
ever?
more than 100 years.
So I actually liked the story for what it speaks to now, especially, and how timeless it feels.
So how did you find this story?
I found this story, I was looking at so I had read a little bit about the history between the friendship of Harry Houdini and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle.
Okay.
In another book, which I'll talk about in another video.
Okay.
Probably our top 10 spooky video.
Okay.
But in that book, I had kind of been looking at, okay, so like, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle had some really interesting perspectives on metaphysics and things, and I was kind of actually looking through a list of his stuff for that reason. And then I came upon a lot of his short stories, and I know we're always looking for short stories, and we hadn't done a Sir Arthur Conan Doyle short story yet.
We haven't done anything.
Yeah, we hadn't done anything with him. And I know everybody knows about his Sherlock Holmes series, but the massive amount of work that he has, so underappreciated. So I wanted to read something. I kind of read a very basic premise of what this was. And I was like, okay, that could be cool. Like, I had kind of at first thought what you thought when I heard the title. Like, we're just going to go into this where a guy finds out his buddy's a murderer or serial killer or something. And it wasn't that, but I still gleaned a lot from it. I still really liked it.
Yeah, it was an interesting short story. Very different.
Yeah. So
Not what you would expect from Arthur Conan Doyle.
no, not at all. But I'm finding the more I look at his body of work, the more I'm finding there's a lot of unexpected happening.
Oh, yeah. Lot more to it than what people are familiar with.
Yeah, and quite honestly, I had never read anything by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. I knew of Sherlock Holmes through other pieces of media or like graphic novel sort of things, but I haven't actually read any literature by him.
Okay.
So this was one of those things where it's like, I'll just dip my toe in with something that's not in the realm of what he already writes, which is the Sherlock Holmes things. And then I'm also reading his book right now, The Coming of the Fairies, which is about that whole fairy photography hoax thing in England.
Photographing fairies.
Yep. So this was on that list, and I was like, I want to try this one. I'm intrigued. So we did, and you found this gorgeous book.
Yeah, when you told me about it, I wanted to find a book. I figured he must have had a short story collection that had the story in it, and lo and behold, it's actually titled for that story.
Yep.
And has 4 or 5 other stories.
Yeah.
And I saw a photo of this cover and just fell in love with it. It's absolutely beautiful. Very small book.
Pocket edition.
Kind of weird to have this very flowery cover with My Friend the Murderer in the middle of it.
I like the juxtaposition of that, though. I feel like that's like beautiful.
But as a graphic designer, I appreciate the decoration of it. And
it's gorgeous.
It's beautiful.
It's gorgeous.
So I had to get it. And, well, I've actually got a new one coming because this one, I receive it. It wasn't in the description. It has pages ripped out.
Oh.
So I did go online and I found another copy for about the same price, not much. And hopefully this one won't have any pages ripped out and I can read the whole thing.
Cross our fingers. Yeah, there's nothing more disheartening than finding a piece of literature that you really want and what you think is great condition and then...
Yeah, especially such a beautiful addition to the collection and then it's not a full book.
Unfortunate.
Yeah.
Oh, well, though. What did you think of the story? I know I
thought it was good. I don't have your background with the system. My knowledge of prisons and such comes from movies and TV. Okay, Shawshank Redemption. That's what I know about prisons.
But that's actually not too far off from the stories I've heard from these guys that my dad dealt with and the people, you know, who came into our home and we befriended. Who, sadly enough, ended up going back to jail because of technicalities or whatever. Shawshank actually isn't too far off.
Yeah.
Really, that's a pretty accurate portrayal of things. And sometimes, too, I wonder how much the media has nurtured prison culture into that.
Okay.
Or if it is innately that way. Because I've heard there are some, like, privately owned prisons that are actually, like, people want to get into because they have, like, college scholarship programs and things, like, that are really, really nice. Or, like, they have a garden that the guys, all just take care of together. And it's, like, a more serene and less violent atmosphere than some places.
Yeah.
But I've heard from who we have dealt with and our interactions, which is like a total of 4 people, but a very consistent, it seems, situation in our area specifically, that Shawshank is actually pretty accurate, unfortunately.
Yeah, but my only real world experience was my ex-wife had a friend from high school who had been driving drunk, and he hit another car and he killed a little girl. So he went to prison, vehicular manslaughter. And my only memory of that is, well, 2 things. Number one, there was a very, very similar accident involving a guy that was in the fire department where he didn't go to prison at all because he was a fireman.
Yes, I have heard similar things in our very own area, in this very county. So, yeah.
And the other thing is that he just kept getting bounced from place to place to place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was very frustrating for him because, he had family that couldn't visit him because they would just all of a sudden decide he needs to be in Texas for some reason.
They just need to transfer him over there.
Transfer him down there. And it just... it seemed to me a very dehumanizing thing, which is, you're not going to rehabilitate people that way.
No, it is, and the guys going into it know that their life's over. Like, that's the hard part. They also were very in disbelief of someone wanting to help them. Because they were pretty... They brainwash you, is essentially. Like, they didn't say that to me, but I take it as they brainwash you into thinking you are worth nothing.
Yeah.
You will never be worth anything. You might as well just stay in prison. Like, you're safer here from, anybody who might hate you for getting caught if you snitched on anybody. And the amount of, like, there is a weird loyalty amongst criminals, too. Like, a lot of the guys went to jail because they wouldn't snitch. And ended up going back to jail because the person they didn't snitched on them. Crap like that just happened, but it was one of those things where they had such a sense of loyalty because they knew if they didn't, that guy had friends. A lot of dangerous friends.
Yeah.
Friends who came out of worse prisons. Who learned things at worse prisons. That was another thing they talked about, too. Like, when you go to prison, you learn terrible ways of always continuing to do crime or continuing to harm people or continuing to do all this, like, crazy stuff where it kind of perpetuates the problem.
Yeah.
So a lot of guys who were abusive came out and were worse abusers to whoever they went next and ended up getting back in. So they had a lot of these guys who they knew who just kept coming back because they kept going out and finding worse ways of terrorizing people and hurting them.
Yeah.
It's a very common problem and it perpetuates itself because you put these people in a remarkably desperate situation that unless they go out and kill all their enemies and try not to get caught, they really don't have a life outside of prison. And prison is no life either.
Yeah.
So it's like, what's the point of continuing to live? Which is another part of the Shawshank Redemption thing that it often happens. Suicide is a big thing for ex-cons. Because they are just so damaged from the way they were treated, from the trauma.
Institutionalized.
Yeah. It's very tragic. Like, I feel the books that could be written, but at the same time, it's like nobody would want to read these because they are devastating. And you just leave with such a sense of hopelessness for the future of anyone who's ever been put into a system.
Okay.
It's just really sad.
Yeah.
So this was remarkably hard read because I had that background.
Yeah.
But it was so accurate to the stories I had heard. So it's remarkable. It's well worth a read if you want to kind of see what an
Yeah,
ex-con's life is
it's
like.
very short, and so it's not going to take much of your time. I don't know. Did you say you got it off Project Gutenberg?
Yes, I
Yeah.
found a digital
So you can
version.
get a free version on Project Gutenberg. This book I think cost me $20 used,
Yeah.
and that's from like 1910 or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's an antique book and beautiful book.
Yeah. It's a prolific writer. It's so unusual to see
Yeah,
things.
and a very different side of a writer you know, but you don't really know.
Yes. It's very interesting, and I had wondered, it's such a short story, but I had wondered if he had known someone who this was a similar
be.
situation. Or like if this is based off someone's real life, because this is very similar to at least 4 stories that I've heard in real life from real people.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, with nuances, of course, because it's a more modern age now, but
Yeah.
torment is torment, no matter how you put it. And incarceration seems to be incarceration for the same way for 100 years.
Yeah.
So, and I think that was what's frustrating about this character, too, is he gets amnesty for having provided a service to his country by ratting out these other criminals under, you know, the assumption that, okay, you did this, we'll give you amnesty, but the next time you do something wrong, we're gonna slam you in forever.
But that's true with any kind of whistleblowers. Even decent people who see wrongdoings and they blow the whistle,
Witness
they
protection.
usually get fired.
Yeah. Fired or
companies
witness protection, or
Yeah,
basically
have people
they're
chase
the ones.
them around, the government watching them.
They then
People
become the victim.
don't ever trust them because everybody has some kind of skeleton that they're afraid this person's going to, you know, blow the whistle on.
Yeah, and that's very, very much what was happening here, where it wasn't so much everybody's afraid, it's just he had been known as a killer. So anybody who's innocent knew who he was.
Yeah.
As a killer.
Yeah.
Or as someone who killed for funds. It was mostly money. It was thievery with manslaughter and murder, essentially. So then he rats out his friends, get amnesty, so everybody who knows who he is afraid of him because he's a killer. Anybody who knows who he is, who's related to anybody who ratted out, wants to kill him. The police really just don't want him anywhere but back in Australia, so he can't get his life back together and just start over with a new name and a new identity, because everybody already knows who he was. He was internationally renowned for having done this.
Yeah.
So part of the issue, too, I think, is the media. The media really just...
Yeah, there was one point they told him to go back to England when he was in Australia. You know,
Yeah.
That's the penal colony.
Yeah, and he's like, but this
Go
is
back
where
to
I'm supposed to
England. We
be.
don't want you
And
here.
then at one point he's in Paris and like, go back to Australia. And then he goes to Australia and he's, go back to England. And he's like, I'm not even from England. And then he goes to England and they're like, go back to Australia. And he's like, he's a man without a home. Like, because he was a criminal. And even if he tried to change his ways and turn over a new leaf and become better, he had no chance.
Yeah.
There was nowhere to settle.
Right.
So, it's just really...
Become a spy.
Yeah. Just go be a hermit, I guess. Go live off the land. I don't know. But yeah, it was a good story. Really hit home for me, for some people I knew, but felt it was accurate. So yeah, that's all I got to say about it.
Okay. So we'll see you next time. And of course, my battery's flashing, so we got to wrap this up.
Thanks, guys. See you next time. Bye.